and then sent it in the mail to the most powerful man in the world who controlled the most powerful military in the world.
The Pact was a list of wrongs that England had committed against the colonies, and it ended like this. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress. In the most humble terms, our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. The founders did not decide in a single heated moment to rebel. It took years of raging at a corrupt, broken system, and most importantly, not being heard. Free men having their voices silenced and injuries ignored. That was the breaking point. It meant wins for our new nation. Crucial among them was the Bill of Rights. And first on that bill was the freedom of speech, the freedom to be heard. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech, the Bill of Rights states, or the right of people to peaceably assemble and petition their government. These rights were crucial. Elemental in the history of all free people on earth is the right to speak and be heard, to effectuate nonviolent change. This is a republic's unique pressure release valve. Without it, humans will resort to brutality and extremism. Forgotten communities in this country cried out for someone to listen to their pain. Finally, someone did. President Trump is above all things a visceral response to tens of millions of Americans not being heard for a generation. Donald Trump gave forgotten people a voice, and he became president as a result. Our political establishment was faced with a choice: to begin to listen to Trump and his base, as our founders intended, or to insulate and silence their critics further. Censor more, shadow ban more, ignore, demonize, insult, cancel more. Punish us for thinking differently. Deplatform and ban us from the public square. The last gasping voice many of us had was a silent voice, our vote. 75 million Americans voted to once more desperately be heard by a system that had ignored us. And our voice was again silenced by the rot and the corruption in our system. That is what led to images like this in Washington, D.C. Hundreds of thousands marching in protest of a rigged election, desperate to fight corruption, precisely as the Constitution describes: peaceful assembly, petitioning our government, telling the D.C. establishment that we will not go away. I was at this march, walking, talking with patriots for 7 hours. I saw what this march was with my own 2 eyes. Patriots from all over the country, peaceful, a deep love for America, thousands singing, dancing, wanting a better future for our country. This is what our movement represents, and this is important. In this march of hundreds of thousands, a small fraction of troublemakers broke off to storm the U.S. Capitol, fight police, and smash up this building. These people are not conservatives. They are not representative of our movement. We are not alike. Conservatives are moral, God-fearing people. We are patriots who love our country. We respect our laws and military and history. We do not want to see our country torn down. We want to see it built up. If you are tearing down our country, you are not a conservative. If you are assaulting cops, you are not a conservative. If you are desecrating and trashing and looting the people's house, our house, your house, America's house, you are not a conservative. You are an anarchist. Do not become Antifa. Do not use the same tactics as the communists. When we become as hate-filled and violent as the left, we defeat ourselves. And that is exactly what this mob did: defeat their own movement. This crashing of the Capitol stopped the legitimate and important debate over the 2020 election fraud. It gift-wrapped a narrative that the right are the violent extremists. I am sick to my stomach at this lie. You hypocrites. I will not be lectured by you, the party of domestic terrorism and death and villains in our American experiment. No political party in American history since the Civil War has done more to break this country asunder than the modern Democrat Party. They have normalized political violence in our society and are unashamed of it. We at the Benny Report have kept the receipts. January 20th, 2017, the day Donald Trump's inauguration in Washington, D.C. looked like a war zone. Here are the images of Democrats attacking police and setting our nation's capital ablaze. Days after the inauguration, Madonna encouraged a Democrat rally to blow up the White House. Yes. Moments later, Kathy Griffin, alleged comedian, posed with a photo of the president beheaded. Do you remember Democrats denouncing or condemning these people? No, they encouraged them to do more, and they did. The most violent attack in congressional history took place soon thereafter, when a Trump-hating Democrat named James Hodgkinson opened fire on congressional Republicans. He would have murdered many of them had it not been for Capitol Police. Trump is a traitor. Trump has destroyed our democracy. It's time to destroy Trump, Hodgkinson posted on his personal Facebook page on March 22nd. Before opening fire on congressional baseball practice and sending multiple Republican congressmen to the hospital with gunshot wounds. Hodgkinson previously volunteered for the Bernie Sanders campaign. Did Democrats pause the anti-Trump rhetoric? No. Democrat leaders encouraged their base to continue the attack on conservatives. Here is prominent Democrat Maxine Waters 1 year after the congressional shooting. They're not welcome anymore, anywhere. She's talking about conservatives there. She's talking about you and me. That is the dehumanizing language that leads to more violence, and that's exactly what happened. The White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders attacked publicly by Democrats. Senator Ted Cruz attacked in public by Democrats. Tucker Carlson's wife and family and home attacked by Democrats. Rand Paul attacked by Democrats in his own home with a hammer and sent to the hospital. Brett Kavanaugh's life ripped apart by Democrats. Capitol Hill was a war zone during the Kavanaugh hearings. I was there. Dozens of Republican senators were cornered and threatened in elevators. I watched it happen. Hearing rooms and Senate offices were stormed. The Capitol steps and Supreme Court were stormed by violent leftists who attacked conservatives. These Democrat mobs resulted in thousands of arrests. Our press celebrated them, encouraged them, and they got more. 18 months after Kavanaugh's confirmation, violent, vicious, deadly Antifa and BLM protests overflowed onto our streets. Dozens of innocent Americans were killed, including Trump supporters, who were hunted down in the streets like dogs and murdered by Democrats. Hundreds of millions of dollars in property damage, lives forever destroyed by Democrat mobs. Democrats and journalists today are horrified by the damage and looting of our U.S. Capitol. Shut up. You are lying, bankrupt people. As the White House grounds were burning this summer and historic churches in Washington, D.C. were on fire, you said nothing. You called these domestic terrorists peaceful protesters. This is what our nation's capital looked like after Democrat mobs attacked our sacred monuments this summer. A war zone. A federal courthouse was bombed and attacked by Democrat mob for over 60 days in Portland. Federal officers protecting the building were sent to the hospital by the dozen. Were Democrat leaders outraged? Of course not. They funded the destruction. Soon-to-be Vice President Kamala Harris bailed these people out of jail. Here is her tweet. It's still up. Staff on soon-to-be President Joe Biden's campaign donated to free violent protesters from jail. Democrats AOC and Sally Cohn and CNN's Chris Cuomo encouraged the violence explicitly. Watch.
Are not equal morally. In the eyes of the law, yes. But in the eyes of good and evil, here's the argument.
Will you condemn Antifa for the attack in Washington? It's easy to condemn a terrorist attack.
I want to be clear in how I characterize this. This is mostly a protest. It is not, generally speaking, unruly, but fires have been started.
When asked to denounce Antifa and the death and horror they have caused, soon-to-be President Joe Biden refused and called Antifa an idea.
Antifa's an idea, not an organization.
Oh, you got it.
Not militia.
Yes, we got to this day because the Democrat Party has normalized and endorsed political violence. They did it for power. This has broken our nation. Spare me your newfound outrage, you soulless ghouls. This show will always denounce political violence and the desecration of our nation. Right or left, you have no constitutional or lawful right to harm another person or destroy someone else's property. We are proud to be morally and intellectually consistent on this show. Conservatives do not become the left. When we become as hate-filled and violent as the Democrats, we defeat ourselves. We will destroy the very country. Coming up, one of the freshman members of Congress who was in the building during all this chaos and who chose to object to the Electoral College certification will join us. This week, what started as an all-around peaceful protest took a turn for the worst, and some decided to storm the U.S. Capitol. That might not have been the craziest thing that happened in the U.S. Capitol this week. What an insane start to our Congress. Joining me now, someone who has been there from the very, very start, freshman member Marjorie Greene. Thank you so much for joining me, Congresswoman. Can I even say that anymore? Can you say Congresswoman?
Well, not according to Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats in the House. You see, that was one of the things they changed in the rules package is we're no longer allowed to use gender pronouns or family names like husband, wife, sister, brother, son, daughter, he, she, you know, all of that. But you can definitely call me Congresswoman because I'm keeping all of those terms. All
right. Let's start with the most recent insanity. What happened over the last 24 hours in Congress? There's a lot of headlines, there's a lot of people saying a lot of things. You had a front row seat. Let's hear.
Yes, absolutely. You know, we've been preparing for weeks with our very important constitutional January 6th objection, where members of Congress and senators had decided to come together and object to stolen electoral college votes for Joe Biden. What was a peaceful rally, just like we've seen all President Trump rallies across the nation for the past 4 years and even longer into his first campaign. Every single one of those were peaceful, no violence whatsoever. And then sadly, you know, there were just some people, a small fraction of people were followed into just attacking the Capitol. It was terrible. I condemn the violence. I have nothing to do with it. I don't want to have anything to do with it. I support the wonderful police officers and the Capitol Police and the National Guard that protected us and kept us safe. But it was very unfortunate. And that does not represent President Trump or the 75+ million people that voted for him.
Congresswoman, I got to say, it's refreshing to hear pretty much everyone, whether it's a freshman member of Congress or the administration or members of the Senate, just straight up condemning political violence. I think political violence obviously is counterintuitive and it's counterproductive and it has no place constitutionally in our system. And that's great. Why can the left not do the same on their side? Because frankly, it seems as though to solve the problem of political violence, you would have to have both sides condemning it on their political spectrum and then coming together and saying, together, we say no to this. But you don't see the same type of condemnation of Antifa, BLM, or the riots this summer.
That's right, Benny. As usual, you nailed it. That is exactly what I've been saying today. You know, new freshman incoming member, Cori Bush, she has just written a House resolution. I think it's called the Insurrection Act. She wants to pass this House resolution where they can expel members of Congress that promote violence, promote what they call insurrection, promoting things like the events yesterday, which I find very hypocritical. You know, my new favorite term for the House of Representatives is the House of Hypocrites. The Democrats who supported and promoted, even helped finance the Antifa BLM violence that this nation has endured for months and months over this past year in 2020 is exactly the problem. These Democrats, they supported BLM on their own fundraising platform, Act Blue. They helped it happen. Then they shared bail bond links on their Twitter pages or social media pages, encouraging people to donate money to bail out these radical domestic terrorists who had just burned cities, burned businesses, attacked people, and killed great, wonderful Americans like David Dorn. You know, these are the people that are the traitors. These are the people who are dangerous to have in government. And so for them to call out people like me, people like Mo Brooks, Matt Gaetz, and many others, and Donald Trump for the events of yesterday is absolutely wrong, and we will not tolerate it.
Thank you so much for joining us. I wish that we had more time, but it's been a wild start. Please come back to the show. Very, very much appreciate having you on, Congresswoman.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Benny.
Coming up, another new congressman and the youngest in the 117th is joining us. Stay tuned. After Wednesday's chaos, some senators and members of Congress still decided to object to the certification of the 2020 presidential election. Joining us now is freshman Congressman Madison Cawthorn, who's been leading the charge on the objection of the 2020 election. Madison, give us an update. What happened this week with that objection, and how was it derailed or put aside or stopped with the chaos at the Capitol?
So I'll tell you, my friends and I in Congress, we decided to object to this election on a constitutional basis. You know, there were some major infractions that happened where you had unelected officials circumventing state legislatures, which is a slap in the face for our Constitution, and it degrades our democratic process in our republic. But what you saw happen is while we were in the midst of debating Arizona, you started hearing the doors slamming. You started seeing Capitol Police getting restless, becoming nervous. And then we went on to a lockdown. We were then told to get behind our bulletproof chairs. We were then told to put on our emergency gas masks.
Jeez.
And then you started hearing the banging. You heard the rubber bullets being fired. You heard the gas canisters being fired. And then we had to move. The protesters started coming in from within the Capitol Rotunda and were making their way into the House floor grounds. So myself and a few other congressmen, we decided to egress out the backside. I'm very happy that we decided to continue to practice the Second Amendment. I was very well armed, so the people that were with me had no worries. We were very safe. Everything was great. But you know what happened is we then reconvened Congress because, Benny, I'll tell you, no mob can shut down the government, not in the United States. We just will not let that happen. And so no matter how dangerous Washington, D.C. is, I will always show up to work. And so as soon as we reconvene Congress, I continue to contest the election in 5 other states. And the reason is because the Constitution doesn't change because of the current events of the day. The attack on our Capitol was pathetic and it was disgusting. But that does not change the fact that there were constitutional violations in our election, and it was what I was elected to do to contest those.
So what is your message to the people who stormed the Capitol?
It's very simple. It's stop. You do not represent the politics that I represent. You are not a constitutionalist. You're someone who just wanted an easy way to lash out to make yourself feel better. At the end of the day, you're not actually doing any good. The overwhelming majority of the protesters who are in Washington, D.C. for the march are good Americans, people who love this country just like you and I. To have them marred by the actions of a violent few is a sad state of affairs. And you also have to ask the question, were all the people who were storming the Capitol actually there for the MAGA protest, or did people infiltrate it? That's a question I would like to have the answer to.
This isn't productive because this clearly did not help you in your capacity to argue about the legality of this election, right?
Exactly. I felt like I was in the midst of fisticuffs with members of the other party through our words while I was contesting this election, following our Constitution. And then to have this happen, it sucked the air out of our sails and really took the moral high ground away from us. And so it did not actually do anything to further Republican values and conservative values moving forward.
Well, you have had a wild, wild first couple days here in this Congress, Madison. Our best to you. Keep fighting.
Brother, it's always good to talk to you. Thank you so much for having me on the Benny Report.
All right. That does it for us here on the Benny Report. America is the greatest country in the world. America is worth fighting for. So keep memeing, keep criticizing, keep thinking, keep fighting legally. Here at the Benny Report, we are fighting legally right along with you. See ya.